Welcome to the Accidental Experts podcast. I'm your host, Bryce Hamilton. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a child and family therapist. I have been in practice for over 15 years, and I'm also a mom of 4. So I know the challenges both professionally and personally. I'm so glad that you're here today to grow your parenting toolbox. Please come as you are and be ready to learn. My goal is to make you the accidental expert so that you can raise healthy humans.
Parents, please be advised that this episode should be listened to by parents first, before sharing with your children. It's best to listen to the sensitive material in this episode first so that you're prepared to help support your children in navigating the conversations we're about to discuss. So if children are in your presence, please listen to this episode at another time.
Hi, guys. Welcome back. I'm so glad you're here today. We are going to be talking to Michelle Denault again, and she is talking to us about this really super important concept called consent. I mean, we all kind of understand what consent is, but do we really? And is it just about sexual things, or is this a topic about everything? Michelle is going to break it down for us and help us to understand what we need to be educating our kids about. With that, let's get to Michelle.
Thanks for having me back again. Just call me Chatty Cathy. I kind of think that's good.
Perfect. Well, we are excited for you to talk to us about consent. I think it's something we oftentimes don't talk about. And I know in my practice, I was looking for a book, and I think I've read it to everybody, recommend a book, a kid's book about consent to like literally every person
Yes.
that
Carly is amazing.
Yes, she is. Her book is awesome because I think consent is such an important topic. So let's dive into it. What is consent? And I think, there's this conception about it being just about sex or our bodies, but like, tell us what consent is.
Well, when I start with littles, I actually read a book to them called Don't Hug Doug. That's one of my favorite books of all time. Doug does not like to be hugged. And the whole book is based off the fact that no matter what happens, you need to not hug Doug. I mean, he loves high fives. He's okay with that, but it's his right to not want to hug. And I love it at the end when they have all those people and the one person says, well, I only like hugs on Tuesdays. And the kids laugh about that because I'm like, he's very specific, only hug them on Tuesdays. Or I only like to be hugged at certain times of the day. And I tell kids, my husband, before he has his coffee, you may not want to hug Mr. Denault, because I've done his students before. But at the end of the day, he may want extra hugs, so it's kind of just instilling in kids that they get the choice to what they're going to consent to and when. I love that book. But I actually even take a book off of their desk and say, should I just come over here and take your things from you? Should I just take your water bottle and take a drink of it? Or should I say, do you mind if I take your book? That's called consent. We have to ask for consent from people when we want something from them. So for especially even at the age of kindergarten, I start breaking that down for them. You don't just take things from people. You ask before you touch people's things, and that includes their body. You ask if you can give them a hug or if they'd rather have a fist bump. Of course, as we get into older kids, consent becomes a little bit more of a different thing. But I think it's important for us to understand that consent just isn't about sex. It's about giving somebody their own personal space and the right to their own personal space. Because we have introverts, we have extroverts, and everybody has the right to their space. I think it's important.
Yeah, to have the power to choose. That's such an important part of consent, is just giving your permission or not. I mean, it's bigger than that, but it's your space. But it's like you having a choice, right?
Yes,
To allowing that opportunity to choose. So why do you think it's important for us to talk to our kids about consent?
I think it's important for us to talk to them about consent. So should something ever come up for them, they know they have a right to say no. They know that they have a right to, when you do little kids, it's much different than teens and preteens. For littles, I teach them that we say no, we get away fast, and we tell a safe adult. That's what I teach little people. So the very first thing I'm saying to them is they say no, right? So how I do that is I say, if somebody's touching you in a way that you don't like, what are you going to say to them? And I give them the opportunity to run that narrative themselves, what they're going to say. And I've got from stop to step off, sister. I mean, I've got some really good ones before, but it's important because once again, that will help if they ever run into a situation where they could be in an abusive situation. From the age of 5 or 3 to the age of 83, it gives them those boundaries, because if we don't set those boundaries, like I said before, they don't know what those boundaries are. Later on, as they get into their teenage years, it's extremely important that they understand consent in the realm of healthy relationships and not just in boyfriend-girlfriend situations.
Mm-hmm.
Healthy relationships are just not in situations that are romantic. They are in friendship situations.
Totally.
Like I have said to kids before, if you go to a party with somebody and they say, if you don't drink, we're not going to be friends with you anymore. Have you consented to that? No, that's coercion, because I'm teaching them about consent. I want kids to understand that they have a right to say no to anything that doesn't serve them in their best interest. And what I try to tell kids is, you were born to belong, not to fit in. And what we need to understand about consent is, if we teach our kids consent and that they have a right to make their own choices and their own decisions about their space and their friendships, their work life, all of those things as they become adults, in their marriages, all of their relationships, when they set those boundaries where people have to ask for their consent, they are more likely to have a life where they belong. And they'll get to be unapologetically themselves, and they'll make the right choices for their lives. When they fit in, they're trying to be like everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're just doing things that they don't even really want to do, because we really haven't taught them that it is okay, necessary, and absolutely a beautiful thing to have to give consent for things that you don't want to be a part of.
Mm-hmm. And enthusiastically saying yes to the things you do.
Yes.
Right?
I teach fries. Have you ever heard of that before?
No,
It's
tell me.
called fries. So consent is called fries. And I always tell kids that now they'll never forget me when they go through the drive-through at McDonald's. So the F stands for freely given. Consent can never be coerced. And like I said, I say to them, if somebody says to you, if you don't have sex with me on prom night, I'm not going to love you anymore. Have you consented? No, that is coercion. You cannot give consent when you're being coerced. You cannot give consent to somebody in a position of authority over you. Even if you think you've given consent, that's your teachers, your therapist, your doctor, law enforcement, anyone who has a position of authority over you. That is considered a coercive situation. It is a position of power and authority. You cannot give consent. The R is for reversible. It doesn't matter how far you've gone. I don't care if you've almost gone all the way. If you decide you do not want to do this, you can say no at any time. And no means no. It doesn't mean maybe, it means no. And if it goes further than that, you have not consented to that. The I is for informed. You have to be informed of what's coming. Somebody can't walk up to you and say, would you mind if I hugged you? And then lay a big kiss on you, right? That's not being informed. You've not consented to being kissed. You have to be informed of what's coming next. The E is for the enthusiastic. It has to be enthusiastic.
Mm-hmm.
And I turn this one around on kids, and they're not prepared for it, because I've already told them about being a survivor of educator abuse and being in love with my teacher. And I say, if somebody comes up to me and says, hey, Michelle, can I give you a hug? And I kind of turn around and I'm like, oh, I guess. I go, is that really enthusiastic? And they go, no. I go, well, what if I say, oh my God, I thought you'd never ask? That's enthusiastic. Consent has to be enthusiastic. You have to want to do it. And then I say to them, but was I enthusiastic with my teacher? And they all go, yeah. I go, yes, I absolutely was. I liked being with him. I wanted to be with him. I didn't think he was hurting me. I go, that circles back to, just because you may think that you wanted it and you think you consented, that circles back to, you now know you cannot give consent to somebody in a position of authority. We go back up to the first one. And the last one, S, is for sober. You can never give consent to when you're under the influence of drugs or alcohol of any kind. I don't care if you think you said yes. I don't even care if you said yes. If you are under the influence of drugs or alcohol, that is not a consensual moment. And I tell adults, listen, I'm not talking about you going out and having 2 glasses of wine with your husband. I'm talking about teenagers who get in situations, or adults who get in situations where they are unable to understand the situation they're in. So we teach kids about fries. That's how we teach them about consent.
I love this. Well, and in my practice, I find myself like teenagers will talk to me and, they've been in a situation and I'll be like, look, here's the deal. Yes, I'm married to my husband. I love my husband, but there are times where I'm like, I'm just not in the mood for a kiss, or I don't want to have sex right now. Like, and I have the right to say, no, thank you today. Right.
Yep.
Even though I'm married to them, I made a commitment. But he understands that I am allowed to say no, as well as he's allowed to say no, right? Like, and we do it in a loving way, but we have the right, even as married people. So like being in any relationship, we have the right to say no. And I think the teenagers are like, really? And I'm like, yes, absolutely. Yes. Like that is healthy, right? If you're whatever feeling you're having, even though you thought you want to do it, you get to the roller coaster, right? You're getting ready to ride the roller coaster. You don't want to ride it. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? No, don't ride it.
Yes, it's your right to say no to that.
Yes.
It's your right to say no to that. And nobody should try to coerce you into that situation.
Yeah.
And I tell kids that you're in a relationship, you've been dating for a year or whatever, and you don't feel like that today. It's your right to say no to that. Nobody pushes you into that. That is not consent. That is coercion. You have the right to just say, I don't feel like that today, or I don't want to do that today. I don't want to drink at that party, whatever it may be. Like I said, it's not just about romantic relationships. It's about every aspect of their life and the choices that they'll make. And they have a right to say no to things at any given time.
Even as parents, right? Our kids have the right to say, I don't want to go to the grocery store with you. And I get that there's complications to this, right? Like, sometimes our kid can't be left alone, right? And so they do have to go with us to
things. Drag them. No.
No dragging involved. But I mean, it's also talking through like, that process, but it does get kind of tricky because we want our kids to honor that part of them. I mean, it's hard for me when my 2-year-old is like, no, I'm not eating breakfast. Right. And it's like,
are you hungry every morning at 8 a.m.? No,
not always.
But I get what you're saying. Like that's we set a plate down in front of kids. And if somebody set a plate down in front of us every night that was something that we didn't want to eat, we'd be like, I'm not eating that. But what I try to tell people about little people, I really hit on the consent thing with, do you make your kids hug grandma when they leave? Don't do that anymore. Ask your own kids. Can I hug you right now? Because they are little human beings. They deserve to have choices because they don't always feel like hugging. They don't always feel like a taco. They don't always feel, but they don't get those choices all the time because we as adults make those choices for them. And I just think it's important for us to, the best we can. Of course, you can't fix 8 different meals. You can't leave your kids at home alone. But I think it's important to involve our kids in so many parts of the life process. What would you like for dinner tonight? Just ask. Would you like to go to the grocery store with me instead of we're going to the grocery store? And I know it's hard. Once again, I've raised kids. I've done it. And it gets very difficult and it's very frustrating, especially when you have 2 different personalities or you got kids going in different directions. But just give them the chance to say yes or no. And you might find that they're a little more receptive.
If they're the ones, have some control.
They have some control.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to think on this one to how to integrate more consent into our lives. Okay, so how can we teach our kids to be looking for other people consenting or not consenting? So we're talking about like friends, right? Or even as a parent teacher, right? Like just being on the lookout for our peers. Giving consent or not giving consent.
Situations that could happen. And even not just in romantic situations, I would say, peer pressure it's a thing. It's a thing at all ages. It really doesn't matter. I don't care who you are, but if you go out to dinner with 12 people and you're not drinking, what do they always say? Why aren't you drinking tonight? Peer pressure is a thing. And our kids, it's easy to tell them not to bend to peer pressure. But once again, how many of us, when you're in that situation, you just want to be accepted? I think that it's really important. My best friend was abused by her father when she was little, from the time her earliest memories are being molested by her dad. And I was being sexually abused by this teacher, which I didn't understand was abuse. I thought I was in love. But we never we knew each other's stories, but we never went to anybody else and said anything. We talked last time about bystander intervention.
Mhm.
I think it's important to first understand what that looks like. We've got to understand what it looks like when somebody's cannot consent. Once again, she didn't understand that I couldn't consent to that. She thought it was my boyfriend too. She'd never learned that. I believed that as her friend, it was best for me to keep her secret than it was to help her. I think education is important first, to teaching our kids what consent looks like, and then giving our kids a safe space to come to somebody if they see something that doesn't look right. And the book I talked about last time, the Unmasking Sexual Con Games, and that book, Breathing Underwater, they both have situations in them where peers could see this happening. They could see the abuses, the little small things. You see that boyfriend that's isolating your best friend away from you. She can't hang out with you anymore. If you go to your best friend and say, I don't like that he's doing that to you, what's going to happen?
Well,
Your
she's
best
not going to
friend,
hang out with you anymore.
yes, your best friend's going to tell you to take a hike. So it's so important that we give our kids the tools to find a safe space to say, I think my friend's in trouble.
Mhm.
And a lot of places have those apps you can go to, but once again, creating that safe space at your home. Why didn't I go to my mom and say, Marsha's dad's doing this to her? I'm not saying my parents did anything wrong at the time. I'm not sure if they knew how to do that, but I'm saying we need to create that space for our kids where they can say, I think I have a friend who's in trouble, or create that place at our school, or create that hotline where a kid can say, I think I have a friend in trouble. I think that there's a lot of components that have to go into helping our kids figure that out. I really do. I think it's a step-by-step process. Education, letting them know they have a safe space to go, setting that safe space into place, and letting them know what it is.
Yeah. Okay, so I mean, you clearly conveyed why it's so important to have these conversations, because it is. We have a lot of demands on our time as parents, and so
We
we
do.
are pulled in lots of different directions with our kids. How often should we be making time to have these conversations about consent?
Well, I actually, one of the risk factors for child sex abuse is stressful home life. And I laugh about that one too, because I have a cartoon on there that says, you as poor, you as tired, you as a parent. And it's true. You got more than one kid, you're going 20 different directions. It's really hard. How many days do people go through the drive through McDonald's? Because,
Easy.
that's
Yeah.
all you got. I mean,
Yeah.
you just don't have time. Families aren't sitting down anymore and having dinner because they're running to sports, they're doing this, they're doing that. I would say, to carve out some time once a week to find 15 minutes to just sit down with your kid and to ask them if they want to talk about anything. We used to do this when I had kids, even when we were running and we were in the car. This was my favorite thing to do with my children. Tell me something good that happened to you today, and tell me something bad that happened to you today. We did that every day when we had a meal, regardless of whether it was at the table at home or if it was in the car on the way to sports. Everybody had to say something good that happened and something bad that happened. And believe it or not, those two questions can open a lot of conversations between you and your kids.
Yeah.
Because when they start to talk about what bad happened, you can expand from there and start to kind of have those conversations. Or tell me something, that happened with one of your friends this week. Just start to ask random questions that kind of seem off the cuff. Or what did somebody do that bothered you this week? Find something that can help you open those doors for those conversations. That's something you could do every day.
Yeah.
It is. You don't have to carve aside tons of times. Just that's, and if something comes up in that couple minutes, think, okay, when we sit down to talk this week, when we have time, I'm going to remember that. Make a note to yourself about that. So that's just a
Well,
thought.
and I like this because I ask my kids 3 questions every night before I put them to bed, because that's generally when it's like the time. But I say, tell me something good that happened today, tell me something tricky that happened today, and tell me something else I need to know about what happened
I love
today.
that one. I love that.
And I do the tricky because sometimes it's bad is maybe not the word we could describe it. It was just like hard or
Right.
weird or yeah, like uncomfortable. And so then it like incorporates all these different things, but it's like getting curious about those things. And I mean, this is the hard part about being a parent is that we've got to show up, right?
Well,
And
yeah.
yeah,
I
yeah.
have a teacher that I sub for. I used to work in her classroom. I was an aide in her classroom, and every morning she sits her students in a circle at the beginning of the day, and two students get to pick what their POW is, and
Hmm.
that's what their great thing is,
Hmm.
and what their wow is, their
Hmm.
wow, and what their POW is. Like POW, you've had,
Yeah.
it's rough. So two students get to share with the whole class what their POW and their wow was. And then the whole class, these are first graders, they get to ask questions. Like if somebody says, well, my dog died, somebody will go, well, how did you feel when your dog died? And it's
Mm.
so beautiful because that opens that up for those kids to express the great things that have happened. Or then she has every kid in the circle turn to a partner and they each get to say their pow and their wow. And then they switch and go to the next person too. She does that every morning before class starts. And I think that is a great thing to do with kiddos at the beginning of the day.
Yeah.
And then she has them all stand up. And this is out there somewhere, but I think it's really cool, like just to do with your littles every day. She has them do a thing where she says, I am safe. I'm brave. I'm smart. I'm safe. I'm loved. I'm going to have a good day. Kiss your brain. She has them do this whole thing
Hmm.
of positive affirmations before they start the day, every day.
Love
And
it.
I think that's something that people could do with their kids in the morning when they're getting, I mean, of course, your teens aren't going to do that with you. They're going to laugh at you. But, but, leave little notes for your teen. I used to put notes in my kid's lunchbox.
Hmm.
You're a beautiful soul, or I hope you have a great day today, or just the smallest things. And my gosh, I know that everybody's tired of hearing about their child's video game for the 100,000th time this week. I've got that kid. But if your kid comes to you at 1 o'clock in the morning and sits on your bed and says, I need to talk to you about something, wake yourself up at 1 o'clock in the morning
Listen up.
because they're asking you for help. Listen, and I know you're exhausted. I remember it. It's exhausting, but it is in the most inconvenient times that your child is going to come to you and want to talk about something.
Mhm.
It always is. And I don't ever want anybody to regret not making space.
Yeah. So that makes me think of last night. My 2-year-old woke up in the middle of the night. It was like 1 o'clock in the morning. I was very disoriented. I went into his room and he was like, hold me, hold me. And it's like, the thing I want to do is be like, be quiet, go to sleep. I mean, that because I want to go to sleep, right? But I was like, okay. So I got him out. I rocked him in the chair. I told him how much I loved him. I put him back in his bed. And then he said, I need water. And I mean, like, I was like, right. But I was like, okay. So I went and got my water. And then he's like, I don't want your water. I want my water. And I'm like, okay, could you make an exception and drink mommy's water, please? Then he did. But I was like thinking the whole time, I'm like, you chose me. Like,
Right.
you called for me. Right. And
Right.
I think those are the things where I really try to be thankful, even in those times where it's hard and you're like, I have this need as a grown up, right? I'm
Yes.
tired. I want to
Yes. I'm
relax.
exhausted.
I whatever. But like our kids need those times. And that's how I think that we open up these conversations is
Yes.
about
Because they're looking
being
for that.
available.
Yes.
Yes.
They're looking, as I tell people when I train, kids see our self care, and it's important to have self care. Don't get me wrong. But kids are in the ego stage of their life. So
Mhm.
they see our self care as selfishness of the time that we're not willing to spend with them, because that's the stage of life they're in. They're not
Sure.
being jerks or anything. And sometimes it's in those moments they're testing that. Their kids will test whether you're going to be available for them or not. And I really want to share this briefly as a mom, to say that one of the hardest moments on my mom journey was my 25-year-old was, he had two parents, showed up at everything. Mom was stay-at-home mom. He did homework with him every night. a lawnmower parent. As I told you earlier, I cleared the path, which I shouldn't have done, but just, he had all the things. He had a mom that was there and present. But his desire to fit in with his peers led him to consenting to do marijuana with his peers. And that led to cocaine. And when he was 20 years old, he found himself in an incredibly bad situation and very desperate. And that was, a little over 4 years ago. And I found myself sitting in my kitchen with my child telling me that he was going to take his life, that there was nothing I could do. And when your child tells you that, you don't let them go to the bathroom alone. Your time becomes very much less important than it has before when you've not wanted to carve out time. And I know that it's hard for us to carve out time, but there's another woman I've seen speak, Ann Moss Rogers, who lost her son to suicide after a heroin addiction. And she said his last day, he kept calling her, and finally she quit answering the phone. And that's not her fault. But a lot of the times it's hard for us to carve out times for our kids, and it can turn out to be tragic. They're looking for how much we're willing to give them time, not because they're being jerks, but because they're in the stage of their life they don't understand anything different. And I wish I would have carved out more time. And maybe my son wouldn't have been sitting at my table like that. He's clean, by the way. He's been clean for 4 years. Extremely proud of him, and he's doing well. But there's a lot of regrets I have in my parenting, and one of those is carving out that time and opening up those conversations. Because once again, consent and the choices our children make are not just about sex. They're not just about abuse. They're about their life and what they're going to do with it. Find the 5 minutes. As a mom who's almost lost her child, find a 5 minutes.
Yeah. Wow, that's powerful. Thank you for sharing that with us. And also talking to us about consent. This is such an important topic, and you've done such a great job at giving us a full perspective of what it is, how important it is, and why to include it in our child's lives and our own, right? Like recognizing
Right,
our own
in our
consent.
own life. Yes.
Yes. Thank you so much for being here today, Michelle.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you again, Michelle, for being with us today. Talking about consent has been so enlightening. I know that this is something that I talk to my kids about and kids in my practice about, but this is a topic that we need to be talking about as parents to every kid, and administrators to every kid, and families to every kid, right? To be able to understand consent so that when we are not giving consent, we know that we haven't given consent and we can stand up and say no. And in order to be able to do that, we have to be prepared. So I imagine that families are going to listen to this conversation several times because there's so much good information, but we will have tons of resources in our show notes. So check those out. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube, and also keep the emails coming with your requests and thoughts. actionableexperts@gmail.com. Have a fantastic day. Some words from our legal team.
The information presented in this podcast is not intended or implied to be a substitute for appropriate professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. All content, including text, graphics, images, and information contained on or available through this podcast, is for general information purposes only. This podcast makes no representations and assumes no responsibility for the accuracy or information on or available through this podcast, and such information is subject to change without notice. You are encouraged to confirm any information obtained through this program with other sources and review all information regarding any condition or treatment with the appropriate professionals.
What we're saying is, yes, I am a real therapist, but I'm not your therapist.